Good morning and welcome to Madison Global Health Institute's monthly webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kaylin Ostrowski and I am the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development at GHI. Welcome to today's discussion titled AI's Potential to Address Global One Health Crises. GHI is a transdisciplinary initiative dedicated to advancing health and well-being for people and the planet through research, education, and collaboration. As a global health hub, we coordinate, connect, and incubate efforts across disciplines and sectors to address the world's most pressing health challenges. Our monthly webinar series features researchers and practitioners from UW-Madison and around the world, highlighting the complexity of global health challenges and the many kinds of expertise needed to address them. Before we jump in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we are recording today's session and the archive video will be available on our website at ghi.wisc.edu. And second, we are monitoring the Q&A section, so please post any questions or comments for the panelists there. We will do our best to address as many as possible during the Q&A session. It is now my privilege to introduce our panelists. We begin by welcoming our moderator, Johnny Uelmen. Johnny is an assistant professor of population health sciences in the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A triple badger, he earned a bachelor's in evolutionary biology and master's degree in entomology and epidemiology before completing his PhD in epidemiology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Previously, he served as assistant director of the Triangle Center for Evolutionary Medicine at Duke University. His research examines zoonotic disease risks at the intersection of changing climates and environments, using statistical, machine learning, and AI tools to improve understanding of disease ecology and support global health preparedness and conservation. Welcome and thank you for joining us today, Johnny. Next, we welcome Matthew Conway. Matthew is the Director of Revenue and Strategy at Hala Systems and a Senior Program Consultant with the International Organization for Migration at the United Nations. At Hala Systems, he helps lead a social enterprise that uses AI and advanced analytics to enhance humanitarian response, protect civilians, and promote accountability for human rights violations. At the UN, Matthew supports emergency health and stabilization programs in Ukraine, Lebanon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, focusing on mental health and crises response. He has also worked with the World Food Program and World Bank on policy and research related to displacement, and previously held national security and global health policy roles with the U.S. Department of State and White House. A proud Badger and recipient of the Wisconsin Alumni Association's 2025 Forward Award, he exemplifies the Wisconsin idea through global service and innovation. Welcome and thank you for joining us today, Matthew. Next, we welcome Beth Tellman. Beth is an assistant professor at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the co-founder and chief science officer of Floodbase. Her work bridges disciplines to uncover the social dynamics behind environmental change observed in satellite imagery and to use satellite data to enhance human well-being. Her research focuses on the causes and impacts of global environmental change, particularly flood risk and land use change. She also co-founded Umbrella, an NGO in Mexico dedicated to advancing transformation from global south perspectives. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Beth. And lastly, we welcome Milind Tambe. Milind is the Gordon McKay Professor of Computer Science at Harvard University's John A. Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences and the Principal Scientist and Director of AI for Social Good at Google Research. He and his team have developed pioneering AI systems with real-world impact in public health, safety, and wildlife conservation. His work has earned numerous honors, including the Triple AI Award for the Benefit of Humanity, the Feigenbaum Prize, and the Engelmore Memorial Lecture Award, along with commendations from the U.S. Coast Guard and other agencies. Milind's research advances AI and multi-agent systems for social good exploring new paradigms with large language model agents to accelerate real-world impact. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Milind. Now I'm pleased to turn things over to Johnny and let's get started. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kaylin. That was wonderful. And hello, good morning to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to have me. This is an honor. I'm a huge supporter of GHI, and of course, as a Badger, as you said, it makes me really happy and excited to learn so much about the impact that other Badgers are doing, whether you're faculty, alum, or friends. This is amazing. So there's so much to cover. I will jump right into my introductions and kind of the sort of the overview of what our group does, and then how that ties into the larger, broader aspect of this topic, which is called AI's potential to address global health crises. So with that, let me just share my screen. That's the wrong screen. Apologies. Okay, let's see. I believe I have to switch that, right, Kaylin?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's funny how we walk through this and it still happens. Okay, how's that?
Looks great.
All right, so thank you all for being here and for getting up in the morning. This is going to be exciting. So just a quick overview on what One Health is, just in case you're not familiar. It's this idea that we are all connected, meaning all of us, the health of animals, the health of humans, are inextricably linked to our environment. So environmental changes it eventually will downstream have effects on animals, in turn will have effects on us. So this cliche, but it's true. When we protect one, we really help protect all in this system. So then when we think about AI, it's this kind of flashy term, right? And I think a lot of people use it across the board for a lot of reasons, a lot of different things. But what exactly is it? And there's many, many different definitions and things to say. But so artificial intelligence broadly is this field of computer science that focuses on building systems that otherwise would require human intelligence. So these tasks can include, but are not limited to, recognizing patterns, interpreting images and sounds, making predictions, and then can learn from data. And then when it starts to do, when you have it trained well, it can do self-learning and generative learning. So when you look at this term of AI, it's not new. It's been around for a while. There was a blip in search terms in 2012. That's when this deep learning, machine learning kind of term, kind of coin came out. And then in the last couple of years, since 2022, this has really taken off, as you see from these graphs. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, currently around $280 billion revenue, and it's expected to exceed 3.4 trillion by the end of the next decade. So it'll be around. And I'd mentioned that when trained well, an AI model can detect subtle patterns far beyond what we can perceive reliably. And I had mentioned that we often will use, and you'll see in a lot of the upcoming talks here that are fantastic, there's a lot of object detection with satellite imagery, also photos and videos, and these can be applied to a number of different things in fields, including environmental sciences, humanitarian works, political science, market trends, etc. So, in a One Health framework, when we apply AI, this can serve as a force multiplier. Maybe it can allow us to monitor changes in those ecosystems, track vectors of diseases and reservoirs, and then also link these disparate, otherwise separate data streams that can power predictive models to inform policy and action across disciplines. So I will jump a little bit into the background I do in my lab. So I started about 16 months ago, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Population Health Sciences, which is in the School of Medicine and Public Health. And I just titled this real broadly, New Technologies that we use to employ artificial intelligence and how this helps in ecological studies. So as an epidemiologist, I also am deeply rooted in ecology. So my formal training is in epidemiology and entomology. So I sort of combining those two with insects and diseases, you naturally will get vector-borne disease and assessments. So I use that with GIS and statistics to help me understand how climate change and environmental disturbances affect infectious diseases, and then in turn, how does that affect the health of animals and ecosystems? So when we do this right, we can get a better understanding of disease systems, and essentially we can model and forecast. And if we do this correctly, we can then provide meaningful interventions that can be used for change. So some of the AI applications that I'm going to discuss very quickly because we have so much content to talk about. But I hope it gets this kind of the ideas of how applications can be used. A lot of this is done with high resolution thermal drone imagery and satellite imagery. We also have photo stacking options and macro photography that we use for 3D rendering of insects. And then we also have employment of citizen science in our studies. So here's just a video showing one of the a recent trip to Bangladesh studying Nipah virus ecology. And if you don't know Nipah virus, it's a very dangerous pathogen that's transmitted from bats to humans. And what we were trying to do in Bangladesh was assess the bat populations and see if we can figure out where they are, what they're doing, and essentially how that might cross paths with humans and lead to spillover events. So on these images, you can see these bright, individuals. Every single one of these is highlighted so crisp and clear as one of a single bat, a flying fox. And this, as you can imagine, this technology has made this element of the ecology much easier for our understanding. And they have these ranges where we can actually follow bats and see where they're going and map that. And over time, we can apply that towards other sort of modeling pieces. So it's very informative. However, there's a lot to process. So some of this in this system is we look at some of the key pieces are trees, particularly palm trees, so date palm. And one of these things I can do is I can go and monitor with the drone. I can do waypoints to find out where these trees are. And we can also look and see what the thermal imagery is of individual bats. We can actually see what their temperatures are, and that might indicate if they're sick or not. But going through all of this and processing this data, you can imagine is painstakingly slow if you're doing it by yourself. It takes manual annotations from our students, and I saw a couple of them are online, so they know what we're talking about. They've done so much of this by hand, and it takes a long time. And I'm asking them to do it because what we're trying to do is have a comparison to show the differences between manual annotation and the solution, which we're building, is this automatic or automated object detection, segmentation, and classification from well-trained AI models. So here's an output of a model that took maybe an hour and a half to program. So there's a lot more to do, and it's already showing amazing success, at least with identifications at close range on thermal and regular. So you can see these binding boxes were detected by these AI models. Here's another example that shows some more, but it's far from perfect. And again, I just said I only spent 2 hours. There are a number of bats that are missing, but it's on to something. It's finding them, and at least it's not getting them like incorrect too much, although there is some here. So this is another kind of lesson or learning point that I won't really talk too much about because we are going to address that much more later with the other speakers. And then when we combine all these image frames, essentially that's what a video is. We can stitch all these together in real time, and then these binding boxes will be added and give us a cumulative assessment of how many of these individuals are in this population or in this tree, for example. And this is really helpful because obviously it takes a long time, but there are hundreds, sometimes thousands of these bats in these trees. And this helps us quantify the risk assessment when people are nearby or in spillover events for this system. So imagine doing this over, many, many hours. It saves a lot of time and is highly accurate. And then incidentally, with these thermal imagery pieces, there's an AI integrated chip that helps us detect like clustering warm bodies. And just incidentally, we found this langur species called a capped langur in the city in Faridpur, Bangladesh, and they're endangered. There's only one of 160 in Bangladesh, and we just happened to find one very easily, quickly. So it's very promising and exciting to use this towards other ecological applications. And I mentioned citizen science. So this is something I think that happens to be a resource that's underutilized, and there is a treasure trove of data if we can harness it. And one example of that is here's a drone again, the image. And remember, I mentioned date palm trees as a key piece. That's what the bats tend to like to drink, and that humans do as well. That's a key zoonotic spillover part. Here, yes, we can go and we can detect manually where all those date palm trees are, but it would be much better if we had people who are on the ground that can help us find this on their own, it's meaning that we make this a reward. So they have an app-based system where they can take a photo that's geotagged and upload directly to our models, kind of giving us like many eyes, so to speak. So we are in the process of developing a tool that can essentially build upon citizen science. And this is one of those tools that I built in conjunction with the Data Science Institute that helps us look at the power of citizen science with mosquitoes. All of these submissions on this dashboard are from apps or app phone-based applications that people have used because they're just curious about their background, their backyards, or they're amateur collectors, or you have it. So all of this information can be used if you can centralize it, pull it together, and identify these things. So it's very useful, and anyone can have this. It's freeware. This QR code you can use to scan to find more information. But when you click on these dots, it brings up a species. And what I'm hoping to is that eventually we can do this segmentation and some additional species automated learning. So just like the bat IDs, we can do this with mosquitoes. And you can imagine if we do this with medically important arthropods, we can start to build a library. And that's what we're on to right now. So first we have to do with the manual segment annotation, which we've been working on. And here we can show some of these examples here. And on the right is our output. So we have Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti. And this model requires a lot more work. It's finding a lot of the key pieces, but it's sort of inefficient at the point. But this is what we're leading to, and we're hoping to do this on an automated pipeline that can feed right back into our dashboard. And then lastly, we have a new tool it's really fun, but helpful, very informative. It's called, it's a Cognisys photo stacking macro imaging tool. And these are it's just a housefly that we started this out, and this was just installed. We just got it going up and ready. But this takes high resolution photos of arthropods, and it takes multiple hundreds of images that aligns them, stacks them, so every single viewpoint is in focus. And when we do this at multiple axes, we can create a three-dimensional rendering. And essentially, this becomes what I like to call like a Rosetta Stone that of identification of AI learning. So every segment of that, every angle of that mosquito, that tick, can essentially be the kind of key piece for identifying and helping our models for anyone that submits anything. All right, so that was a lot, very quick, and I want to just pass this along right away to our next speaker, Matthew Conway, who's also, I have to note, an alum of UW. So very happy and excited to learn more from him. And we're going to hold questions until the end as well. Thank you. Matthew, I hope I gave you some time to switch over.
Thank you very much. Also, amazing panel. That was really interesting. And I hope that much of what I'm about to show is going to build upon that. Here, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see now?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you for the kind introduction earlier. My name is Matthew Conway. I am proud to say I graduated from the UW-Madison in December of 2013. I'm currently calling in from London, UK, where I live with my partner and work with a tech company called Hala Systems, and as well as the United Nations Migration Agency, also called the International Organization for Migration. Hala Systems is a social enterprise that works to bring frontier technology into humanitarian and crisis response, whereas IOM is the UN agency responsible for migration. And with IOM, I specialize in conflict-affected and crisis-related migration. So those who are forced to move from their homes as a result of war, conflict, or disasters. Today, I am going to discuss how humanitarian actors are using AI to improve both prevention and operational response to highly complex environments. I'll draw on examples from both Hala Systems and the work that we're doing today, and the International Organization for Migration, and connect these applications to the broader global health subject that we're discussing today, where human, environmental, and animal systems, as Johnny articulated, interact. The goal here is to clarify what AI can do, where it helps most, and what its limitations are in real-world crisis settings. So At a very high level, humanitarian actors are using AI for about 6 broad applications. I'm talking about early warning and anticipatory action in the jargon, improving situational awareness. I'll discuss today applications that WFP is using, a former employer and a UN agency, the World Food Program of mine, uses. Strengthening aid targeting and prioritization, supporting operations and logistics. WFP is a leader in this field as well. Improving information management and analysis. IOM is a leader in this, as IOM collects a significant amount of data related to displacement. And monitoring community risks and perceptions, so community need, community tensions, and early signals of instability. I'm primarily going to talk about response, but in this point, it's important to mention that prevention is also an application here, as it helps you forecast and understand where risk may be taking place. And you can't really prevent a flood from taking place, but you can prevent, in some cases, conflict from escalating if you're able to take the findings from these systems and work through diplomatic channels, for example, as applicable. To tie this back to the subject today, while the AI tools I show here are not exclusively supporting medical and public health workers, there's real relevance here to health outcomes, as many of the drivers of health risks originate outside of the health sector specifically. We're talking about environmental degradation, flooding, drought, population movement, conflict and war, infrastructure damage. These all shape disease transmission, food security, and access to care. The AI tools I'll show here help us detect these stressors much earlier, particularly in areas where surveillance is weak, and respond faster. What matters here is that AI improves visibility across human, animal, and environmental systems, allowing responders to understand where health burdens will rise and act sooner, and pre-position aid so that responders are ready when crisis onsets. The goal here is earlier detection, but not just early warning, earlier and faster response. Knowing that I only have 10 minutes here, I want to make sure that I touch on and give enough time to a very important point, which is the risks, limitations, and ethical considerations of these systems. Because much of what we're talking about are effectively intelligence tools, but applied in the humanitarian context, and it provides and poses significant risks for privacy and for conflict sensitivity. First, local context has to be central, as Degan Ali, a colleague of mine based in Somalia and Kenya, said at a recent UN convention in Geneva on this. We must be extraordinarily careful not to replicate power imbalances and biases through technology. The most complex questions are always going to require local, contextual, and lived experiences to answer in a meaningful way. From this, we start to talk about bias in AI systems, as the data that an AI spits out is only as useful as the data that goes into it. So you need to really ensure that there's a human in the loop here, and that the data that an AI system is trained on is accurate and locally relevant. Data gaps are significant as well to this point. Imagery and mobility data, which I'll discuss a bit later on, and general open source intelligence information are unevenly available, particularly in some of the crisis contexts we're talking about, and training data often skews towards certain geographies here. Again, on the localization emphasis. Because of this, we need to avoid over-reliance on automated outputs. AI surfaces relevant signals, but humans have to interpret them. It's very easy to look at the output of an LLM or a vision language model and take that as face value, but without verification from people on the ground or an expert, errors can cascade into operational harm, and in this case, we're talking about lives. Fourth, we need to navigate the ethical protection risks that come from this and the operational limits. AI is always going to have blind spots, and you need to know where those are. But the main takeaway here is that AI provides a huge benefit to the field. It strengthens decision chains, but it cannot replace human judgment in these complex environments. I'm going to talk about 2 types of systems here. The first are geospatial analytics, and the second are multi-data fusion tools, building around geospatial analytics primarily. So as the head of OCHA, the UN's coordination body, said, in a crisis, information is as important as food or water. And without reliable data, it's impossible to know where needs are most accurate, needs are most acute, or how to best respond. And this is the problem space that at Hala Systems we're trying to solve. Crises move faster than traditional decision cycles, and we need to provide decision makers with the data to catch up. Humanitarian information systems are often very siloed, slow, and difficult to reconcile across agencies. And AI helps reduce the time it takes to locate relevant data, understand what has changed, and interpret that meaning, relevance, and operational implication. Starting off with traditional methods that aren't always and are increasingly so AI powered are change detection types like this. Beth is going to get into the more advanced information on this, so I'm not going to the more advanced applications of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But the image here, the highlighted areas show flood extent with detected changes outlined in purple. We are able to flag here what has changed, but not necessarily why. The cause of it is not able to correlate with external data sources like weather or climate data to suggest that this is indeed a flood. This is just an image that compares to a previous image that says these areas do not look the same as before. There are comparison issues here in low light or cloudy conditions, and it's not good at making up for these issues. AI-powered object detection seeks to build upon this, and you can see here the bounding boxes around the houses. Leveraging an AI-powered object detection tool, WFP and the team at Google Research developed a tool called Sky and Deep. Sky is with satellite imagery and Deep is with drone imagery to assess building damage on a large scale. You can see here how a heavily damaged area is mapped using both Sky and Deep. The pink areas here the dark pink are very heavily damaged. The red areas are completely destroyed. The light pink areas have sustained heavy damage, but are less so. Having these systems help responders figure out where to direct aid in a crisis. When you think back to the earthquakes in Turkey and Northwest Syria several years ago, this tool, Sky, provided WFP and the humanitarian response broadly in the area with several days notice or faster analysis so that they were able to deploy people to the areas that needed help the most. While this information was of course available to those who were on the ground in these areas, they knew that the area was heavily damaged. It was difficult to compare that across a broad set of areas. This helped responders direct to specific locations and save lives in the process. Here is the same concept, but zoomed out quite a bit more using Airbus technology, Airbus data. You can see the dots here and the clustering around this over a much, much broader area. Now at Hala Systems, we've developed a different type of change detection using a vision language model that we like to call semantic change detection. Semantic change detection rather than object-powered detection, which tells you that a image, rather like the house is there or house is not there, or the type of aircraft or the type of vehicle, we are able to describe a full scene and describe the change between the first or the second scene and the first one. We're able to do this across SAR, synthetic aperture radar imagery, thermal imagery, electro-optical, the image you see on the screen here, agnostic of the type of data sources. So unlike these traditional methods shown before or the object-based, we can detect things like new earthworks, vehicle clustering, smoke plumes. This case right here, as you see on the screen, is the Polish-Belarusian border. Several years ago, in August 2021, there was a migration crisis that caused a lot of political consternation in the area and a lot of negative humanitarian outcomes among the migrants, primarily Iraqi Kurdish origin. In August and going through the winter, and this sort of analysis would not have been possible with traditional types of change detection. And I'll explain why this matters for the humanitarian context. Here, you can see a border zone, and the technology behind this is such that you can draw a polygon over an area that you want to monitor and be alerted to any change related to a natural language query. So say, for example, I want to be alerted to any traffic at this border point. You highlight a border point, for example, on the Sudanese border that often would not have traffic at it. It is just a low traffic environment. And if there is traffic at this area, then that means that something's gone wrong, or you want to know about it so you can understand it. Humanitarian responders and UN agencies often don't have the kind of teams that can monitor imagery like this at scale. So being able to just have passive analysis and passive monitoring allows them to monitor a place as vast as Sudan, like they have a team of 1,000 analysts. The next frontier, though, is multi-data fusion beyond just satellite imagery. In Hala systems, the origin point was an early warning system in Syria, where we were able to use acoustic sensors paired with human spotters and additional measurements of environmental stimuli to assess the likelihood uh, of aerial attacks. In this case, we were able to use enough information to be able to understand that this, like a chemical attack, was inbound in a specific area. We were able to provide early warning to individuals to be able to leave the area just in time. There were still casualties, but because of the early warning that we were able to provide, it was significantly lower. The health outcomes of this are obvious. Life saved, individuals who were not affected by the chemical attack, and you can scale this much more broadly to think about the overall impact. The UN is piloting a tool in the Philippines that they call nowcasting. So think about the satellite imagery analysis and the over a flood area or earthquake destruction area. This was a typhoon. They're able to map out those areas that were most heavily affected, but then overlay on top of that mobility data, top-up information. They were able to find that those locations in the Philippines that individuals topped up their cell phones by the 50 cents, $1, $2 were much more highly correlated with poverty than those who topped up 20, 30, $40 at any given time. So with this, they were able to not only target those areas that were most heavily impacted, but those areas that were most vulnerable to negative outcomes. In Al Fasher, in Darfur, in Sudan, which has been very unfortunately in the news due to atrocities over the last months. Hala Systems has been working with UN agencies there to support the response. During a rapid escalation, a humanitarian partner was relying on fragmented information and manual satellite imagery review. We supported them by rapidly analyzing image sequences over a very vast area over a course of time, identifying new shelters, vehicle movements, and settlement shifts early, where partners were then able to position resources sooner than they would have otherwise, targeting assistance more effectively. The improved outcome here, obviously, is earlier operational awareness and supporting more advanced decision-making. We call this tool Hala Fabric, looking at the prevention space as well, for example, supporting WFP, which is the UN's lead logistics agency as well. You're able to monitor, use a change detection agent in what's called an agentic workflow, change detection agent to identify signs of degradation in a bridge, use mobility data, which are these ad IDs when you select, yes, please share my location with Fitbit or any other app. Then we are able to monitor these anonymous pings to say that this is a person with a cell phone, to understand that traffic has changed over this bridge. Social monitoring agents are able to understand local posts to say that there are warnings of delays, there are flooded roads, and you're able to issue an alert to operators to say that there's a high risk of a bridge failure, that there's this bridge is a critical access point, and that the loss of this bridge would lead to significant disruption. This illustrates how these tools can support anticipatory action. And I would be remiss if I did not discuss one of the most advanced tools in the industry today run by the International Rescue Committee. Our partner is based out of New York. Can you see my screen? There should be a video here.
Yes, we see it.
Do you see the video?
Okay. I see an image. Yep, you're not playing, but yeah, I see it.
Okay, brilliant.
Let's see if it'll go
okay.
there. Yep.
So what you see here, this interface is called Signpost. Signpost is a suite of different tools, but IRC uses this to merge different data sources. This is another instance of data fusion, where they're able to overlay NASA precipitation data with topographical information to be able to understand the risk of flood. They have this global mapping interface where they can see any crisis indicator broadly in a central place. Using this information, they can target specific locations where they know they have Facebook or other social media reach, and they can send blasts to people who they've already interacted with in that area. This helps them inform and automate digital targeting and outreach, assess risk and plan response. This is just a start, and it will be improved with better data going into it, and better data can help them reach people in real time. Right now, the next stage for the UN is to integrate many of these different data sources and ensure that there's no overlap. Because in this system, for example, it's only as effective as the IRC's previous outreach. For example, IOM is working in this area, but IRC is not able to connect with IOM's beneficiaries in this case. So while they're able to reach out to all those individuals that they know to say that there's a flood incoming, they can't reach everybody. So how do you expand that reach? IRC has provided all the code behind this is open source. So if anybody's interested in digging into that, all you need to do is go to sidepost.ai and dig into their GitHub. But they have a chatbot as well. As hundreds of thousands, millions of people are displaced, they're able to interact with this agentic LLM that provides them with case management services. If you have a question in Iraq, for example, that you're at risk of losing my home, you have an HLP, a housing land property concern, you're able to get support on this specifically. Looking behind the scenes, you can see the agentic workflow in action. There's the chat. There are different searches ongoing across different databases that are able to provide the user with all the information that they need to answer their query. And if needed, they can reach out to a specific individual. The problem set here, of course, is that there are maybe several thousand at a particularly well-resourced response, humanitarian responders, but millions of people who are affected. And this is able to increase the capacity dramatically of the overall response. So I'm a little bit over time, but
No, that was amazing. That was absolutely fantastic. And I think we all want more, but in the sake of, we have two more presenters who have wonderful things as well. And to the audience, we're gonna probably have a very tight Q&A, but I encourage you guys to reach out to any and all of us if you have questions. I believe the emails are linked. If not, we can also chat. I guess hopefully we can put those in the chat maybe. But if anyone has questions, please put it in the chat. We can query it and also respond later. Okay, so we'll move on to Beth Tellman. Please take it away.
All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. We're good.
Yep, that looks great.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take a pretty deep dive into one of the topics that Matthew talked about, which is flooding, which my lab does a lot of work on. We're called the Social Pixel Lab, based at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin. And we really are sitting at this intersection of hydrology, social science, and remote sensing, and always partnering with actors outside of academia to think about where could a flood map be useful and how do we sort of fit it to this really specific decision-making context. And I've worked a little bit in the health area, or people have used the data that my lab creates to come up with new insights about what is this interaction of flooding and health. So maybe if there's sort of health-oriented folks on this call, you already know this, but flooding intersects with a lot of different health areas, from pregnancy to malnutrition to even mental health. And what we really focus on, again, kind of Matthew talked about this, but really is generating these time series data sets of where does water go when it floods. And we can do that because we have satellites taking images of the earth every day. And that's been happening for several decades, but every year we get even more imagery to do a better job of this. So while flood models, which people have traditionally used to do flood analysis, can try to estimate the probability of where water might go, a satellite image shows you where did the water actually go, which can give you a lot more insight into what's happening or has happened on the ground. And when we look at satellite data over several decades, we can actually see really different things about flood risk than if we had just used a flood model to do that. So a couple of years ago, we produced the Global Flood Database. This is the largest observational database of floods around the world. Anyone can access it. And what we found was that there were 80 million people moving into flood areas where we had seen a flood happen just in the past 15 years. And this was a much higher rate of sort of moving into floodplains than flood models had previously predicted. So we have worked with other health researchers and epidemiologists specifically who have used that data to find some interesting things. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those findings here. I'm not on these papers, but John Sullivan, who also just got hired into the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, who I produced the Global Flood Database with, he's been working with epidemiologists at Harvard and Columbia to do some of this work. And so, for example, when we combine these time series of flooding in the US with mortality information, we find some surprising things. For example, that where we're seeing a lot of elevated mortality risk in the US from flooding is specifically snowmelt floods. So there's something about that specific type of flood and location. We also saw, interestingly, elevated mortality rates from infectious and parasitic disease up to 6 months after the flood happens, and other respiratory and neuropsych conditions about a month after. When we combine our data, or epidemiologists combine our data with hospitalization rates, we find other outcomes, for example, elevation of certain types of diseases, and then they can look at this by demographic. For example, skin diseases and mental health impacts are much higher in areas with larger percentages of Black residents. So these are just some of the health insights that one can get from combining sort of the satellite data with these records. Just to go into the methods for a minute, these are not very technical slides, but I'll just say kind of one thing about this is we're using mostly vision-based AI to get the most information we can out of every satellite image and sensor, convolutional neural nets. We use long-term, short-term memory networks. We've started to use transformers and foundation models. So I won't get into any of those details, but here's a couple of papers from my lab if you're interested in those methods. But a lot of what we do, I'm just going to kind of go through this figure on the right here. And you've seen this in other presentations. This is a very typical supervised learning AI. Making these painstaking labeled data sets. Johnny talked about like identifying the bats in every image. We do that, except for it's for flooding on the ground. So, we had like 20 undergrads painting in these high resolution images. And we use that to train models. We've released that data set. It's called Flood Planet. So hopefully no one else has to go through and do that painful process that we did. But we found, for example, by doing that on commercial imagery, which we had access to because we had a NASA grant, you can actually take those annotations from commercial imagery that most people don't have access to, and you can train a model on public satellite data, for example. One of the data sets that we used to create a 20-year history of flooding in Bangladesh, for example, was this is a paper in review right now, again, a collaboration with epidemiologists at Stanford and Rand, is that if you look at infant mortality rates and this satellite data, you get much higher estimates than previous estimates of mortality estimates from floods by using kind of these better AI data sets that tell you where water is going exactly. And they've then sort of in this paper taken this data set and used it to figure out like what are the causes of this really? Why do we see exposure to flooding in utero increasing infant mortality? And they can look at sort of maternal visits and access to doctors and all sorts of other data that they can then combine this with to hopefully attack this problem really specifically beyond just sort of this headline of infant mortality increases in floods. Getting into these underlying mechanisms is so critical to address this problem. Another example, I'm actually talking to you all today from the Rio Grande Valley, Texas. I do a lot of work on flooding on the US-Mexico border. And we've been working with lawyers, actually, Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, who help people file for FEMA aid after a disaster, or sometimes even have to sue FEMA when FEMA doesn't give people the disaster funds that they need. So we co-produced a tool with 5 community-based organizations. It's bilingual. It was recently used for recovery and aid in the March 2025 floods that happened here. But the thing that's important about this work isn't just the flood maps. And Matthew Conway talked about this actually too. We use human in the loop AI methods. And so we actually train the algorithm on where people have experienced floods used that to make maps, and then showed people the maps, and then went and did it again. We did several iterations of this, and it makes the algorithms better, and that's good. But what matters even more is that people understand the data. They see their lived experiences and themselves reflected in it. Um, Okay, I think for time, I'm gonna kind of fly through these last couple of slides, but I just want to give one other example of how AI and satellite data is used to solve financial risk problems for insurance. When it floods, there's a lot of loss that can affect society from many different sectors, including hospitals, for example, and the health sector. And I co-founded a company about a decade ago called Floodbase that uses these satellite time series that I just talked to you about for insurance companies to price insurance products and pay out. This is called parametric insurance, where someone can get a payout based on data. And not having to have a damage assessor come and assess the damage, then go to court to fight about it. This is a much quicker way to do a payout. So that's mostly what Floodbase enables. Several municipalities in California have purchased insurance that's enabled by our data. The city of Fremont, for example, when flooding reaches a certain level in an inundated area that we can see on a satellite map, the municipality gets a payout. And that's really great because they can use it for anything that they want or need, and it's much more flexible than traditional insurance. And we have examples of doing this all around the world. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Beth, wow. There's so much to talk about. Again, it was just like a common issue. We could do this for a long time. That was wonderful. Everyone, please queue up your questions. We're going to hopefully just go right on to Milind, Tambe, and I must apologize in advance on behalf of all of us. So Milind has a video that we're working on the audio for, and seems to not be producing. So I just wanted to have that out there. But Milind, please take it away, and then hopefully we'll have some time for a few questions. Thank you. Oh, Milind, I think you are muted. Sorry.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, and we can see the slides. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for your wonderful presentations. So for the past 20 years, my team and I have been focused on advancing AI for social impact, focusing on topics of public health, conservation, and public safety and security, with the key challenge of how to optimize our limited intervention resources. So given we have limited time, I wanted to highlight two recent projects that we've been focused on. The first focuses on world's two largest maternal mobile health programs. This is centered in India and uses bandit algorithms. The second is network interventions for HIV prevention. This is work we've done in Los Angeles and currently ongoing in South Africa. So for the first work, the motivation here is the maternal health crisis we face today. The UN Sustainable Development Goal for 2030 is that the maternal mortality ratio, mothers dying during childbirth or soon after, should be below 70 per 100,000 live births. Where we are today, the dashed line is the UN target. In the United States and Western Europe, the numbers are lower than the UN target, but worldwide, the numbers are more than double the UN target. So this may seem like a problem that's out there, but even within the United States, in states like Mississippi, the maternal mortality ratio for Black mothers is 20 times worse than what it is in countries like Greece and Slovenia. So it is a global problem. But we will focus on the challenges in India, where the numbers are rapidly declining, but still higher than the UN target. We've been very fortunate to have worked with Uelmen, a nonprofit in India that works with more than 40 million mothers. In collaboration with Uelmen, the first challenge we focused on with them was their M-Mitra mobile health program for new and expecting mothers. So this is a weekly 2-minute audio health message that's sent out to these mothers from the time they register to the baby being 1 year old. Every week, they'll get this weekly audio message. A small snippet of this is for you and your baby to be strong. You need lots of iron, and then iron-rich foods include meat, jaggery, etc. This is a small snippet of a 2-minute audio message delivered in the local language in a sing-song manner. There's 141 such messages that are delivered on the phones of these mothers. Cell phones are very widely available. and over 3.6 million women have benefited from this program. In randomized control trials, Arman has shown that if mothers listen to these voice messages, they benefit and their children benefit significantly. But unfortunately, 40% of the beneficiaries who register may become low listeners or drop out of the program. And that's where we come in. So there's call centers from which Arman can give live calls to these mothers to try to persuade them to not drop out of the program. The challenge is that there's 200,000 mothers registered at a time. Remember that automated audio health messages go out to each and every mother every week. But from these call centers, we can only call 1,000 of these mothers in a live call to keep encouraging them to listen to these messages. And the question is, which 1,000 out of the 200,000 to prioritize to maximize the total number of health messages that are listened to? A further challenge is that these mothers have dynamic state. A mother might be in a state where she did not listen to audio voice message, but next week she may shift on her own to starting to listen. So from a bad state to a good state. The mother might be in a bad state, not listening. We give her service call, but she may not change her state. To make this even more concrete, consider this very simple example. There's 5 mothers under the care of this call center. 2 shown in green have not listened, 3 shown in red have not listened to any voice messages, 2 shown in green have. And we get a budget of 2 calls in this case to call these mothers in a live call. If we call the first 2 mothers, we would expect there to be 4 in green, but in reality, because of this dynamic state, we may only end up with 2. Again, with a budget of 2, if we call 2 mothers, we may expect again next week there to be 4 who would in green listening to these voice messages, but we may end up with none. So how to prioritize these 1,000 out of the 200,000? We turn to a model called a restless bandit. So for those who may not be familiar, restless bandit, each mother is modeled by what's called a Markov decision problem. The mother might be in a bad state, not listen to a health message, or a good state, she has. We can take an action to intervene by calling her via service call or not. And then we have these transition probabilities that model the behaviors of the mothers. If the mother is in a bad state and we give her service call, the probability of going to a good state is 0.8. But if we don't, the probability drops to 0.2. In reality, there's 200,000 of these MDPs because there's 200,000 mothers, and we have to choose the top 1,000 mothers. There's a technique called computing a Whittle index, which essentially computes what's the expected benefit of intervention on these mothers. So if we can compute this index, basically that allows us to rank all of the 200,000 mothers based on the expected benefit of intervention, and then we can choose the top 1,000. We ran a first study with 23,000 mothers in the field, divided into 3 groups, 1/3 in the restless bandit group, 1/3 in the round robin group, 1/3 in the current standard of care group. Remember, all beneficiaries every week always got an automated health voice message. Then what changed is who got a service call. We've called 225 mothers per week for 7 weeks. In the restless bandit group, these were the mothers who had the highest Whittle index, highest expected benefit of intervention. In the round robin group, the first 225, then the next 225, etc. In the current standard of care, no one was called because that's the current standard of care. And now we want to know how many more health messages are listened to over the current standard of care in each of these groups. And what we find along the x-axis here are different weeks, along the y-axis cumulatively, how many more messages are listened to compared to the current standard of care. What we see here with the blue, which is the restless bandit group, 600 more messages are listened to compared to the current standard of care. With round robin, there's hardly any improvement. The point here is that if you just call these mothers round robin or random, it doesn't work. We really need to optimize these service calls, and the restless bandits technique allows us to optimize, and we can show that it cuts the drop-off rate by 32%. We deployed a system with Arman based on these restless bandits since April 2022. It has served over 350,000 mothers. What does that mean? We've cut the drop-off rate by 30%. And for bottom 25 percentile of these mothers who are listening very little, the content exposure has more than doubled, 130% improvement in listenership. Okay, so they listen more, but does that really change their health behaviors? In a further study with 22,000 beneficiaries, we are able to show that these mothers take more calcium, take more iron tablets, know more about the baby. And so not only has this AI intervention improved listening behavior, but it has also improved health behaviors. There's a small video that shows an interview with one of these mothers. I don't know if the sound plays, but you can look at the. So our next step now is to work with Kilkari, which is the world's largest maternal mobile health program with 3.5 million mothers registered at a time. I wanted to shift gears and talk about network intervention for HIV prevention. This is work first done in Los Angeles, where there's 10,000 youth who sleep on the streets every night. The HIV rates in this population is 10 times the rate of the normal house population. To spread information about HIV, homeless shelters want to identify key influencers, key peer leaders, so you can educate them about HIV prevention. They can talk to their friends, and their friends can talk to their friends. And in this way, information can spread in the social network. But just from the position of these influencers in the social network, how can we identify the right kind of influencer? So our AI technique called Change identifies these right kind of influencers in a study with 750 youth in Los Angeles, comparing change to degree centrality, which is the more common technique of bringing in the most popular youth and a control group where there's no intervention at all. At the end of 1 month, we can show that in terms of reduction in HIV risk behaviors, like reduction in condomless anal sex, this change led to more than 30% reduction, whereas there's no difference with these other techniques. There's further studies in our papers. More recently, now we've started to work in South Africa in collaboration with World Health Organization to do network-based HIV testing. So here, the motivation is that there's estimated 6 million people worldwide who do not know their HIV status, but we don't have enough number of HIV tests and health worker time. And so the World Health Organization recommends network-based testing. And so from real data, we see that these HIV transmission networks are sparse. And so based on that, we've come up with newer algorithms, and we are about to start testing this in the field with collaborators in South Africa, for example, Professor Alastair Van Heerden. So to end, I talked about bandit algorithms to optimize resource allocation in public health and networks for HIV testing and prevention. Thank you.
Milind, that was wonderful. Thank you. We have we're running right up to time, so I want to ask our panelists: is everyone okay staying a few minutes extra for any attendees that might have questions still? Maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes max overtime, if that's okay. And I also see that we cannot. Awesome. Okay, girl, all three say yes. Great. I sort of misspoke about we can't put our emails in the chat. It's a Q&A, so it's one way, but we will have it listed on the website when everything's posted. And I will try my best to sort of query anything that's not answered or any questions that come later to each of the panelists as well. So we got 4 different perspectives of how AI can be applied to a number of different global health, One Health challenges and solutions. All were amazing and fantastic. I have a ton of questions, but let's see if the panelists have any. We can maybe take a couple to get started. And Kaylin, I cannot see a Q&A. Oh, I can. I apologize. It looks like we don't have any questions unless I'm incorrect on that. I will kick it off then if we don't have any. So one thing we did not talk about that I just wanted to highlight was that I think Matthew might have touched on it, but like AI is not entirely a replacement. Humans have to play a critical role. So we have to train. We mentioned Beth had said that too. The painstaking piece of doing so many parts of this. That's something that is critical. And because of that, there are a lot of limitations that we employ and put into these models. So they're only as good as what we say and do. I think that's a common misnomer, misconception that tends to get a lot of this sort of negative feedback with AI. And also, Matthew, I also talked about the implications of intelligence and using this responsible. Another piece I wanted to also mention was that the ethics part of AI and using it for good, and how it can also be, along the way, it can lead to irresponsible use as well, and also misinformation, and the kind of the readiness of getting kind of whatever you want to see or feel, or kind of all of that is sort of automated, and a little bit of the dangers of AI. So I hope that prompts some new discussion, some ideas, and clearly you can see the benefits. I think I learned a lot, and I'm very excited. Um, I wanted to see just broadly, what are some of the challenges? If you could name, if all of you could say one challenge that you guys had that you hope to overcome, or are optimistic about defeating, I suppose, in the next couple of years, what would that be?
So let me go first. First of all, thank you all for your wonderful presentations. I learned a lot. I think in AI for social good, a major challenge is the fact that even though we're supposed to be swimming in the world of big data, in AI for social good, often we're faced with low data, low compute, and low resources. And that's a challenge that continually comes up. For example, in the work I showed with HIV prevention in Los Angeles, I talked about finding influencers or peer leaders in a social network, but the social network itself is not available. And therefore, one has to figure out how to get that data. We figured out some clever sampling strategies, but those are the types of questions that will come up. And I hope that we can get to address these challenges of low resources, low data, and low compute in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Milind. That was great. Beth or Matthew, do you have any? If you, otherwise, no pressure.
Yeah, I can go from my side. There are two big problems. One is data siloing between different organizations. Like I said, different UN agencies, even under the UN umbrella, do not coordinate to the extent that they should, in that IOM's displacement tracking matrix has heaps of displacement related data and migration data, but it's very sensitive, and it's difficult to overcome a lot of the regulations around that to safeguard it, because in the absence of assurance for that, you safeguard it, right? And the World Food Program has its own, and together this information could be really powerful, but we're not able to figure out a way to safely share that. Second is getting this into the hands of those who could actually use it and respond, because I can use the system from the safety of my home in London and understand to a greater degree than many potentially what is occurring in Sudan, but I'm not able to do anything to support that. But that said, there are a lot of risks in deploying that in somewhere like Sudan, as some of these tools are very powerful to understand what conflict parties are doing. And imagine giving this kind of tool to a non-state actor, or like to some sort of humanitarian responder, and then a conflict party figures out that they have that, and it could provide significant battlefield advantage to them. That puts these people at incredible risk of their own. And you can't ask people to do that, but then also the risk of it falling into the wrong hands is also really high. And this data is really powerful, even open source, commercially available data. And we're in this revolution now where anybody is able to really, with the right tools, make great sense and use of that. But there's a great risk to that as well that we're still figuring out.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. That's very great points taken. Beth, want to finish it out?
All right, I'm going to take a totally different angle. I'm really worried about data centers and the proliferation of sort of AI. And to me, I'm really concerned that data centers are sort of the next big environmental justice issue. What communities will become sacrifice zones where their water, land, and energy gets used to support AI for everybody else? So I use AI as a user of AI for good. We got to look at the other side of this equation. And think deeply about AI governance of data centers and who that is impacting and starting to impact as we move forward in this area, working on algorithms with higher and higher computational loads. I'm a sustainability scientist, so I care about people and the planet long term, and we got to make sure that our solutions to today's problems don't cause problems for other people in other places.
Yes, and on that note, thank you. I want to believe that there's a lot of optimism and good, and the three of you inspire me that there is a lot of good for AI for good. So thank you for for your leadership, for all the good that all of you do. I think I will pass this along to Caitlin to do some closing remarks, and thank you all for attending and sticking around.
Yes, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. This has been just a wonderful discussion. And I have to say, even leading up to this webinar today, all of the conversations we've been having as a group has been just wonderful. So I look forward to continuing working with all of you. Thank you to everyone to attending this session. And please check out the archived video on our website, ghi.wisc.edu, to see today's session as well as learn about upcoming events. Our next webinar is on December 9th at 9 a.m., where our panel will explore UW-Madison's microsurgery initiative to improve global health. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.